I don't normally eavesdrop on other people's conversations, and I still can't quite figure out what compelled me to listen in on this one. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was down in the basement tinkering with the hot water heater when I heard the phone ring. I wasn't sure what my wife Karen was doing upstairs, but since the basement phone was within reach, I picked it up. Before I had the chance to say anything, I heard her voice on the other end from the upstairs extension. "Kevin, you really shouldn't be calling here. What if Peter had answered instead?" she said, her voice tight with concern. "I would have just told him it was work-related," Kevin replied nonchalantly. "Don't stress yourself out. I just wanted to let you know everything's set for tomorrow. We'll meet at the Horizon Lodge in room 214. Be there at 1 p.m. sharp. I've got a bottle chilling and fresh strawberries waiting. And don't forget that black silk lingerie you told me about." "All right," she said with a sigh. "Just make sure nobody sees us leave work or come back together." "You sound nervous," Kevin said, teasing slightly. "Having second thoughts?" No, Karen replied quickly. "Everything's fine. It's just that I've never done anything like this before, and naturally, I'm a little scared. But I'm not going to back out. It'll all be fine, I promise." "All right, just remember, if Peter ever finds out about this, I'd be devastated. I better go before he overhears something. See you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Bye." I hung up the phone at the same time they did and sat there, stunned. For the next 10 minutes, I replayed that entire conversation in my head. Why the hell did I have to pick up that phone? Karen and I had known each other practically our whole lives. We'd gotten married a year after high school graduation. She was the only woman I'd ever been with, and I had always assumed I was the only man she'd been with too. Even now, she was still beautiful and kept herself in great shape. We had one son, Brian, who was in his senior year of high school. We didn't socialize much outside of each other, and I thought everything between us was fine. Clearly, I had been wrong. I decided I didn't need to drain the water heater after all. Instead, I grabbed a drink from the mini fridge we kept down there and tried to ease the growing ache in my chest. I mulled over my options. First, I could confront her immediately and blow everything up with a dramatic confrontation. That idea didn't appeal to me. My second option was to drop a few hints, say something that would make her think I was suspicious. That idea seemed better, but it would just delay the inevitable. Then there was option 3. Let her go through with it. I found myself liking that option more and more, with one slight twist. I'd let things play out but give her a chance to back out at the last moment. If she took the out, fine. If not, then I'd have no choice but to confront her. She had her own set of choices too. Maybe if I was lucky, she'd change her mind entirely. But deep down, I doubted that. She might take the out I was going to offer, and that seemed a more plausible possibility. But the most likely outcome, as much as it hurt to admit it, was that she'd go through with it. Now that I had a rough idea of my plan, I started to feel a twisted excitement. I figured after dinner, I'd dive into some serious planning. First, I needed to gather more information. I'd been working for a security systems company for nearly 20 years, and for the past year, they'd been encouraging me to take over the Huntsville, Alabama office. Karen, however, had always been against relocating. She had worked at an insurance company for the past decade and was doing pretty well. But I never liked her coworker, Kevin Mitchell. I guess my gut had been right about him all along. He was married, and his wife seemed nice enough, but now he wanted mine too. The move to Alabama would be good for Brian since he had his heart set on attending Auburn, where the in-state tuition would be far more affordable. While we were having dinner that night, I made up my mind to take the Huntsville job, no matter what happened the next day. I could declare residency there, and by the time Brian started school, he'd qualify for in-state tuition. I didn't feel the need to tell Karen yet, but decided to mention it to Brian after dinner. I would give notice at work in the morning and start packing as soon as possible. With that decision made, the rest of my plans began to fall into place. Brian and I had always gotten along well. When I explained that I was planning to go to Alabama ahead of the rest of the family, he thought it was a good idea and agreed to keep it between us for now. I didn't mention anything about his mother's plans for the following day. I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to handle that yet, but I was confident something would come to me by the end of the night. Later, I told Karen I needed to make a trip to Home Depot for some supplies and headed out. My first purchase was a disposable cell phone with a 60-minute calling card. I knew I'd be making quite a few calls, and I didn't want any of them traced back to me. Afterward, I swung by my usual bar, where some old school friends who were less than reputable hung out. I borrowed a car door unlocking tool while I was there. Tony Hayes, a guy I didn't know well but knew of, was at the bar. He had a reputation for being tough, and most people steered clear of him. I noticed his Corvette in the parking lot when I left, so I grabbed a screwdriver from my car and, within a minute, I had his license plate. I knew where he worked, so I'd be able to contact him if necessary. My next stop was the Horizon Lodge. I wandered around the lobby, casually browsing brochures for local attractions and restaurants, picking up what I needed. The clerk at the desk gave me some details about the motel, including a map and the phone numbers for housekeeping and room service. When I got home, Karen was watching TV. I told her I had some work to do in the office, and she mentioned that she planned on taking an early shower and heading to bed since she had a big day tomorrow. While she was in the shower, I rifled through her briefcase, pulling out her planner and address book. I spent the next half hour jotting down names and phone numbers, trying to prepare for what was coming next. Then came the tedious part, inputting all the phone numbers into both the disposable phone and my personal one. I still had a few more numbers to dig up from the phone book before everything was set. After what seemed like hours, I finally had all the pieces in place and collapsed onto the office couch. That night, sleep was a distant dream. My thoughts kept circling around Karen and what she was planning to do. I couldn't help but wonder where I had gone wrong, what I had done to push her into this. By the time exhaustion finally overtook me, I had convinced myself that I was somehow to blame. When morning rolled around, I was hit with a swirl of emotions. I got up, made some coffee, and set the breakfast table. When Karen came downstairs, she looked absolutely stunning. "You look really nice today," I said, trying to sound casual. "Is there something special happening at the office?" She shot me a look. "What are you talking about? I always look nice." "I know," I said with a weak smile. "Just messing with you." We both fell silent, flipping through the morning paper as we ate, but there was a tension hanging in the air. The conversation was lighter than usual, almost forced. I wasn't sure if she was on edge or secretly excited. "I've got a lot of errands today," I said as I finished my coffee. "I might not be back until late for dinner." "That's fine," she replied. "I'll make something that'll keep until you get home. Anything specific you'd like?" "Whatever's easiest is fine," I said, my voice barely carrying any warmth. We were both dancing around the obvious, each pretending everything was normal, when we both knew exactly what was happening. After breakfast, I arrived at work early and began finalizing the details for my move to Huntsville. I signed all the necessary paperwork, cleaned out my desk, and then made a stop at a divorce lawyer's office. I collected all the forms and information I'd need if my last-ditch effort didn't work out. Afterward, I drove home, packed up my clothes, and loaded everything into my car. I took the hard drive from my computer, gathered any important files or documents I might need, and secured the valuable coins where most of our savings were held. By the time the banks opened, I had already closed our joint accounts and canceled the credit cards. I knew I was acting hastily on some of this, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's decision was already made. On my way back, I stopped at the florist and ordered a dozen red roses to be delivered precisely at 1:15 p.m. Timing was going to be everything. At 12:30, I pulled into the Horizon Lodge parking lot and found a spot where I could see room 214 without being noticed. I carefully arranged everything I needed on the passenger seat of my car and waited. Soon enough, Kevin showed up. He stepped out of his car carrying a grocery bag, probably the strawberries and bottle he'd mentioned. He entered the room briefly and then came back out to fill the room's ice bucket. As he prepped the scene, I began making my phone calls. The first was to a pizzeria. "Hi, I'd like a large pepperoni pizza delivered to room 214 at the Horizon Lodge. I might be in the shower when it gets there, so make sure the delivery person knocks loudly enough for me to hear. 20 minutes is fine." I made similar calls to 3 more pizzerias, just to spread things out. Then I switched it up and ordered egg rolls and sweet and sour pork from a nearby Chinese restaurant. I figured some of the restaurants might call back to confirm, but that didn't matter. The effect would still be the same. Karen hadn't shown up yet, so I made another call to the motel's housekeeping, asking for extra towels and an additional ice bucket. I estimated they'd show up in about 15 minutes. Finally, I spotted Karen's car pulling into the lot. She parked at the far end, clearly trying to keep it hidden. With a small overnight bag in hand, she walked toward room 214. When she was about 20 feet from the door, I dialed her number. "Hey, it's me," I said, keeping my tone light. "Peter?" She sounded surprised. Is everything okay? You don't usually call me in the middle of the day. I was just thinking about you and wanted to tell you that I love you, I said, keeping my voice even. Oh, she said, her voice softening. That's sweet, Peter. I love you too. All right, I said. I'll let you get back to work. See you later. Bye, she said, a slight hesitation in her voice. I hung up the phone and watched as she turned and entered the motel room. That was her last chance to change her mind. She didn't take it. A tear slipped from my eye as I continued with my plan. The seventh call was to the local TV station. Hi, I think there's something unusual happening at the Horizon Lodge. If you've got a camera crew nearby, it might be worth checking out. No, I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I heard the police are already on their way. Thanks. As I ended that call, I made my way over to Kevin's car. Luckily, he had parked in a spot where I could discreetly swap his license plate with Tony's without being seen. Once I finished, I dialed Karen's office. I knew she had a 3 o'clock appointment with a client named Jeff Turner. Hi, this is Jeff Turner. I had a meeting scheduled with Karen Price for this afternoon, but I need to reschedule. Could you have her give me a call when she gets back in? After swapping Kevin's license plate with Tony's, I casually tossed the old one under Kevin's car. Then, I headed over to Karen's vehicle and moved it to a spot behind the motel, out of sight. As I made my way back to my car, I dialed the next number on my list. Hello, Mrs. Mitchell. This is a friend of your husband's. He asked me to let you know that he's having some car trouble and needs you to pick him up immediately. He's at the Horizon Lodge in room 214. You can reach him on his cell or through the motel's phone system at 962, 8822, extension 214. She hesitated, so I added, I'm not sure why he didn't call you directly, but I believe he's meeting with a client, a rather attractive one in fact. Goodbye. Next, I made a call to Tony's workplace, Prime Metalworks, and asked to speak with his supervisor. Could you please let Tony know that there's a white Honda parked at the Horizon Lodge with his license plate on it? Thanks. After that, I called the police. I reported seeing a couple of people swapping license plates in the Horizon Lodge parking lot and told them that something didn't seem quite right. I gave them Tony's license plate number and suggested they look into it. The first pizza delivery arrived at the motel room not long after. It looked like there was some confusion at the door, but Kevin eventually paid for it, and the delivery guy left. I kept going with my calls, the next one being to Karen's mother. Hi, Mom, it's Peter. I don't have much time to explain, but Karen is at a motel with one of her co-workers. Could you please call her and try to talk some sense into her before she does something she'll regret? You can try reaching her on her cell, and if that doesn't work, call the Horizon Lodge directly at 962. 8822, extension 214. Sorry, I have to go. Please make the call now. Goodbye. More deliveries showed up not long after. 2 more pizzas and the maid with extra towels. The commotion at the door seemed to go on for a while, but eventually everyone left. That's when I made another call to the motel. This is Mr. Mitchell in room 214, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's a leak under the bathroom sink, and the water is starting to seep onto the carpet. Could you send someone to take care of it right away? Thanks. A loud motorcycle pulled into the parking lot a few moments later, cruising slowly down the rows of cars. It was Tony, of course. He parked right behind Kevin's car, but before he could do much of anything, a police car pulled in. Tony started gesturing wildly, and soon enough, he was in a heated discussion with the officer as I made my next call. Mr. Morgan, this is Peter Price. My wife Karen works for you, correct? Yes, thank you. I've always appreciated your professionalism. Unfortunately, I have to inform you that she's currently at the Horizon Lodge, in room 214, with Kevin Mitchell, one of your other employees. Yes, I'm certain. You have a company policy against this sort of behavior, don't you? If this is a violation, perhaps you should contact them both to confirm. The motel's number is 962, 8822, extension 214. I no longer want my wife employed by your company, and I would recommend looking into Kevin's employment as well. I apologize for having to bring this to your attention, but I felt it was necessary. Goodbye. As I watched the scene unfold, a delivery person from a nearby Asian restaurant pulled up, while the police officer started making his way towards room 214. Tony was still yelling as he trailed behind the officer. I made yet another call. Hello, Kate. It's Peter. I hope you're doing well. Listen, I'm in a bit of a situation here. Karen is at a motel with one of her co-workers. and I'm on my way there now. I don't want the police or reporters to catch her in a compromising position. Could you call her and tell her to get dressed before I arrive? She's at the Horizon Lodge, room 214. If she doesn't answer her cell, try the motel phone. Also, I moved her car to the back of the motel, so she might need a ride. If you can get there before I do, maybe you could pick her up and take her home. I really appreciate your help. Call me back when you can, okay? By this point, things were getting pretty chaotic at the motel door. The maintenance worker had shown up to fix the sink, the delivery guy was trying to collect payment, and Tony was still arguing with the cop, who was now speaking to Kevin. Just then, a florist arrived with the roses I had sent, but they were having some trouble at the door. It was my cue to leave. My work here was done. As I headed out, I passed a TV crew pulling into the parking lot. On my way home, I tossed the disposable phone into the river and kept driving. I stopped briefly at the house to say goodbye to Brian. I told him I'd keep in touch and asked him not to be too hard on his mother over the next few days. I would have given anything to know what was happening in that motel room during the past hour. As I drove out of town, I made one last call. I wasn't sure if he'd even pick up, but I figured it was worth trying. "Kevin Mitchell, this is Peter Price," I said firmly when he answered. "I want you to listen carefully. If you touch my wife, there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" There was a long pause on the other end before he responded, his voice uneasy. "Yes, I understand." I didn't bother to say anything else. I hung up the phone and focused back on the road, heading toward the interstate. About 8 hours later, my phone rang again. It was Karen. "Peter, where are you?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and a hint of desperation. "I'm driving down I-81, just outside Knoxville." "Why? What is happening? We need to talk." I didn't waver. "There's nothing left to talk about, Karen." "Please, Peter," she pleaded, her voice softening. "Just talk to me." I sighed deeply. "All right. I'll ask you 3 questions. Be honest with me, and then maybe we can talk." "Okay," she said quietly. "What did I say to you when I called earlier?" "You said, 'I love you.' What did you do after we hung up?" A brief silence. "I went into the motel room." "And why did you go into that motel room?" Another long pause. "Peter, I don't want to answer that." "Goodbye, Karen." I ended the call and powered off my phone. I wouldn't be needing it for the rest of my trip. With the company covering all the moving expenses, I treated myself to a nice motel for the night and had a good meal. I knew I needed to establish residency quickly, so I spent the next couple of days hunting for an apartment. It wasn't difficult to find a decent place within my budget since I wasn't too particular. Once settled, I set up new phone service, updated my mailing address, transferred my car title, and got a new driver's license. I even registered to vote and completed the necessary paperwork to declare my residency. After mailing off the documents to start the divorce proceedings, I felt like everything was finally moving forward smoothly. I was ready to begin my new job and new life. I called Brian to give him my new cell number and asked him to keep it private from his mother, but I also told him I'd understand if she pressured him into sharing it. He didn't think it would come to that. He also mentioned that Karen had lost her job and wasn't handling it well. I asked if they needed anything, but Brian assured me they were managing. Brian became my only connection to the past. A few weeks later, he told me that Karen had received the divorce papers. She signed them and returned them the same day, apparently without even reading them. He also said she had stopped wearing makeup and was selling off most of her clothes and jewelry. Nearly every weekend she'd hold a yard sale, selling anything that wasn't nailed down. I'd given my lawyer power of attorney to handle the house sale and didn't care about any of the profits. Karen eventually found a job at a small bakery near our old house. Right before Brian graduated, she put the house up for sale at a ridiculously low price. It sold almost immediately, with the condition that she and Brian could stay until graduation. Karen found a tiny apartment close to the bakery, and she gave Brian the car when he left for college. The apartment was small, just a simple upstairs unit, and whatever she didn't need, she left behind in the house. Brian helped her move, and then he left for Auburn. By the time he moved out, Karen had practically stripped herself of everything from the old house. Brian told me her new place looked like a monk's quarters, bare, sparse, and lonely. Though Karen had never denied Brian anything, it seemed she was punishing herself, cutting herself off from every comfort. Brian's concern for her was clear whenever we talked. 4 years flew by, It was a 4-hour drive to Auburn from where I lived, and I didn't get to see much of Brian. He was busy with school and his friends, and I was consumed with work. Karen had the title company send me the entire check after she sold the house. She didn't keep a cent. I deposited the money into a folder I had set aside for her. During that time, I bought a small house and spent most of my days fixing it up, doing improvements here and there. I didn't date or socialize. I just wasn't interested. I craved companionship, but wasn't willing to get close to anyone. Graduation day finally arrived, and I made the drive to see my son receive his diploma. We had assigned seats at the ceremony, and Karen was seated right next to me. Despite everything that had happened, it was good to see her again. She looked all right, though a bit tired, older, a little worn down. She didn't wear makeup anymore, and her lack of grooming gave her a sadder, weary appearance. We exchanged smiles and a quiet hello. There wasn't much time for conversation as the ceremony started, and honestly, I don't think either of us knew what to say. Soon enough, it was over. Any awkwardness between us was interrupted when Brian came rushing over, grinning from ear to ear, excited about finally earning his degree. He was full of energy, talking rapidly and glowing with pride. Watching him bask in the moment was a great feeling. A few of his friends came over to introduce themselves, and shortly after, they all headed off to Gulf Shores to celebrate. Suddenly, Karen and I were left alone with each other. "How'd you get here?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "By bus," she replied. "I've got a round-trip ticket, and I need to be back at the station by 6. Could you give me a ride?" "Sure, no problem. When do you need to be back?" "I took a week off, but I can't stay here. I was just going to head back tonight and spend the rest of the week painting my apartment." "Sounds like a blast," I said with a slight smile. She chuckled. "What's the alternative?" "You could stay at my place for a few days. I can drive you back when you're ready. It's a better option than the bus." "Anything's better than the bus," she said with a half smile. "But staying at your place? I don't think that's a good idea. It would be too hard on both of us. We never really talked things through. I was angry back then and cut you off completely. I never gave you a chance to explain anything, and I've regretted that over the years. Now you want me to explain everything? After our lives have already fallen apart? Isn't it a little late?" "I think it might be," she admitted. "What could I possibly say now that would make it right? You wouldn't have listened back then. Why would you listen now?" "I don't know," I said, pausing for a moment. "Even if we don't end up talking about the past, I'd still enjoy your company for a few days. Are you sure you can't spare the time?" She hesitated. "I've got the week off, I suppose. I didn't bring any luggage, though. No worries. We'll stop at Walmart and pick up some clothes. It's a 4-hour drive, and I'd love the company." "I can't imagine anything good coming from this," she said, sounding uncertain. "But I'll give it a try. If you do anything to upset me, though, I'll walk away without a second thought." "Fair enough. My car's this way." We drove in silence for the first few miles. After a while, we stopped near Birmingham, and I bought her some new clothes, underwear, slacks, and a few tops. I managed to convince her to get a pair of sneakers, but she refused to buy any makeup. I didn't push the issue. Afterward, we grabbed dinner at a country table, a restaurant she'd always enjoyed. As we continued our drive up I-65, she finally opened up. "The answer to your last question," she said quietly. I glanced over, confused. "What?" "That day on the phone, the answer to your last question was intimacy. That's why I went into the motel room." She took a deep breath. I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud at the time. I don't know why. Maybe I was too embarrassed, or maybe I didn't want to hurt you. But after you hung up, I realized you already knew. It was stupid of me to deny it. I tried to call you back, but your phone was off. That's when I knew my life was over. "You broke my heart," I said quietly. "I know," she whispered, "and I don't know how to make it right. I've spent so many nights lying awake, trying to figure out how to fix it, but I couldn't come up with anything. After a while, I realized there was nothing I could do to make it better. I had nothing to say. She seemed to be handling it all on her own." "If you knew what was happening," she asked after a long pause, "why didn't you stop it?" "I couldn't stop it," I replied. "Only you could have done that." "You could have said something," she said, almost pleading. "No, Karen. If you had known I was aware, you might have stopped, but for the wrong reasons. I didn't want you to avoid it just because you thought you might get caught. The point was that you needed to stop because you knew it was wrong, not because you feared being found out. Does that make sense?" Yes, it does, she said, sighing. But I still wish you had said something. I did, during that last phone call. You mean the one where you told me you loved me? She asked. Exactly. I was giving you the chance to stop before things went any further. I was giving you the opportunity to choose. It was a test, and I failed it. God, I was so stupid. I won't argue with that, I replied. Did you ever love him? Kevin? Heavens no, she exclaimed. Kevin loved his wife as much as I loved you. We were just friends. I don't get it. If it wasn't love, was it just lust? No, not even close, she said, shaking her head. There was nothing like that between us. Honestly, it was more platonic than anything. Kevin and I were just friends, with no real desire to take it beyond that. Then how in the world did you two end up at a motel, planning to have sex? It's a long story, she admitted. We still have about an hour until we reach Huntsville, so I'll tell you. She took a deep breath. Kevin and I had been working together for nearly a year. We talked about all kinds of things, and eventually the topic of intimacy came up. Neither of us had ever been with anyone other than our spouses, and we weren't complaining about our marriages, but we got curious. The more we talked about it, the more comfortable we became with the idea. One day, we started discussing the possibility of having sex with each other, just to see what it would be like. No strings attached, and it would only happen once. It felt more like two adults playing doctor than anything else. I know it sounds ridiculous now, but that's how it all started. Did it ever cross your mind that there might be consequences? I asked. Honestly, no. We were so detached from reality that it seemed as casual as going to the movies together. At the time, I didn't think you'd ever find out, so I didn't imagine it would hurt you. I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. And what about Kevin's wife? How did she take it? She almost divorced him, Karen said quietly. I went to see her and explained everything, just like I'm doing with you now. She didn't go through with the divorce, but I doubt their marriage was ever the same. Kevin was fired when I was, but he tried to fight it. He argued that since we never actually had sex, he didn't violate any company policy. The arbitration board didn't buy it, though. They moved to Baltimore, and I haven't seen them since. By the time we pulled up to the house, I was relieved. The conversation had been necessary, but it wasn't easy to hear. I showed Karen to my room and took the guest room for myself. After making sure she had everything she needed, I said goodnight. There would be more talking tomorrow, hopefully more pleasant than today's discussion. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of breakfast, something I hadn't experienced in years. Karen had made it for me, the first time in a long while that I didn't have to fend for myself. So, I said as I sat down, tell me again about this intimacy with Kevin. She laughed and threw a napkin at me. You jerk. You know there was no intimacy, and you know exactly why. I guess I ruined a romantic afternoon for you then. Get real, Peter, she said with a smirk. You know the situation. Sure, he brought drinks and strawberries, but it wasn't romantic. Don't make it sound worse than it was. All right, I said, holding up my hands. So, did you two do anything? Oh yeah, she said sarcastically. We answered at least a dozen phone calls and dealt with another dozen knocks on the door. Some twisted idiot had everyone and their brother calling or knocking. The closest we got to sex was when I took my shoes off. You didn't have a good time? I asked with a raised brow. It was the most miserable half hour of my life, she said, shaking her head. While that biker was trying to break down the door to get to Kevin, I snuck out. When I saw that my car was gone, I just broke down and cried. That's when Kate showed up. You called my sister? And worse than that, you called my mom? She still isn't speaking to me. I'm sorry if I ruined something so important to you, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I take full responsibility for what I did. It was awful. Oh no, you don't get to claim that, I said, cutting her off. I'm the one at fault here. This whole mess is my doing, and you can't take that away from me. I've spent years drowning in guilt over this. I'm not about to let you swoop in and take credit. Maybe so, she said softly, but I still feel partially responsible. I should carry some of the blame. Don't do that to yourself, Karen said softly. The moment I stepped into that motel room, I lost all my self-respect. That's something I'll never get back. But at least, thanks to your phone calls, you saved my virtue. For that, I'm grateful every single day. I only wish you could have done something sooner. But now, I understand why you didn't. It's a sad situation, Peter. I've always loved you, and I never wanted to hurt you. I'm truly sorry for everything. I won't ask for forgiveness because Frankly, I don't feel like I deserve it. Losing your love and trust has been the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Karen, I said, you never lost my love. She nodded, her eyes softening. I'm glad to hear that, Peter. But what about the trust? I hesitated, looking away. That's gone, Karen. I don't know if I can ever get that back. She sighed deeply. That's fair. It's only right. She glanced over at me, trying to shift the mood. What are we doing for lunch? How about sushi? Perfect. Do you think I'm dressed okay for it? We had a good afternoon together, despite everything. After lunch, we stopped for some shopping to get Karen a few outfits that didn't make her look so much like a nun. I even managed to convince her to buy some lip gloss. Nothing too fancy, just a little something. Later, we had a light dinner, just some soup, cheese, and crackers, and sat down with a nice drink. It was good to see Karen starting to relax, to see glimpses of the woman I used to know. The more we talked, the more comfortable things became. Then, out of the blue, she asked, So, Peter, are we going to have intimacy tonight? I wasn't sure how to respond. I don't know, I still have some issues. She laughed. Issues? Seriously? Yeah, well, I'm worried that if we make love, I'll be thinking about you and Kevin the whole time. I can't help but feel anxious about it. Karen rolled her eyes. That's nonsense, and you know it. How would you know? I shot back. Because, she said with a mischievous smile, about 30 years ago, when we first started dating, you told me you used to fantasize about Pam Young, the cheerleader. Remember that? I blinked, caught off guard. Did I actually tell you that? Oh, yes, she said, grinning. And for the next 4 or 5 years, every time we made love, all I could think about was you imagining Pam Young. You've got to be kidding me. Nope, Karen said with a smirk. And now the tables have turned, and you can't handle it. I dealt with it, so why can't you? I shrugged. All right, fair point. So, who do you fantasize about when you're, None of your business, she teased, sticking her tongue out. Come on, I urged. We all fantasize. Who's your dream lover? Fine, she relented with a laugh. Most of the time, it's you, even after everything. Most of the time, I pressed. Who is it the rest of the time? She hesitated, then grinned sheepishly. You're not gonna laugh, are you? I promise, I said, leaning in. Mel Gibson, she confessed. I burst out laughing. You're joking. I'm not, she insisted, giggling. I've always had this thing for Mel Gibson. I don't think it's weird. He's a very attractive guy. Okay, I said, still laughing. But that makes me wonder, over the past 5 years, who have you been fantasizing about when you're, relieving tension? She shot me a look. Mostly you, believe it or not. I've never really stopped thinking about you. I smirked. Same question back at you. She raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, mostly? I shrugged again. Sometimes I think about you and Kevin together, Karen gasped, playfully shoving me. You're sick. You fantasize about Kevin and me so you can get your kicks? No, not exactly, I admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. After everything happened, I wondered why you'd want to be with him. I couldn't figure it out, so I convinced myself that maybe he was a better lover than me. I used to think about how he might have pleased you. Over time, I started focusing on the idea of you getting pleasure, blocking out the fact that it was with another guy. Somehow, it became erotic to me. She stared at me for a moment, then shook her head, laughing softly. Well, we're even now. Deal with it. She got up and stretched. I'm going to take a shower, and after that, we're going to make love. You can think about Pam Young, and I'll be thinking about Mel Gibson. It's settled. She smiled at me playfully. Tomorrow, we'll go grab my things, and I'm moving in with you. Are you ready for that? Are we getting married? I blinked. Wait, married? I don't think I can marry someone I don't fully trust yet. Maybe in a few years we can revisit the idea. Oh, I get it, she teased. You just want to stay single in case another Kevin comes along, huh? I grinned. You're an idiot. One more remark like that, and I'll smack you upside the head. Now, go disconnect the phones. I don't want any interruptions. We laughed and got to work. It only took about an hour to load up the car with her things. Brian wasn't wrong. She had really sold off almost everything. She even sold the remaining furniture to the landlord for $200. As I finished packing, she ran over to the bakery to let them know she was leaving for good. Then, we hit the interstate, heading south. At some point during the drive, I looked over at her and we shared a smile. I have just one more question, I said. I promise I won't bring it up again." "Okay," she said, curious. "What is it? Where on earth did you get a Mel Gibson poster?"